Oh, with a video like this, you really got to question how you use YouTube, how you reach out to your audience. To what extent YouTube is supposed to be a diary, to what extent it's supposed to be a documentary, to what extent it's supposed to be cinema verite, and to what extent it is supposed to be what we call heightened life, aka drama, theater, art, artifice. So I put some thought into this video, and I decided the best way to do it is with absolutely no thought at all, with no script, with no bullet points. I'm going to leave out whatever I'm going to leave out, make this as spontaneous as possible. This is the story of how my daughter was born. And yes, my daughter was vegan from conception, vegan from birth, however you want to put it. Me and my wife, now my ex-wife, were vegan all along. Let's start this thing at the end and then go back to the beginning and offer some impressionistic observations along the way. Let's do this real latter-day postmodern style. At the end of the process, I will always remember standing in front of a professional government bureaucrat in the French hospital system and trying to get them to type my daughter's name correctly on the legal form that would generate her passport, her birth certificate, all of these crucial pieces of ID. And my wife and I both had enough experience up to that point with how French bureaucracy works to be terrified, because the woman we were talking to was incompetent. She had only one job. The one job was to type out the name of a newly born baby correctly. This wasn't like an office that handled 10 different things at the hospital. No. This was a specialized office that only had one function, and this is a woman sitting behind the desk who only had one job. And unlike my own name, my daughter's name is not hard to spell. Minimum 4 times. My wife and I are standing there, and it's needless to say, we have not had a lot of sleep. I don't even mean the last 48 hours. We haven't had a lot of sleep in like a week, okay? And we're standing there trying to remain friendly with this terrifyingly incompetent bureaucrat, because we know if this woman makes a mistake on this form now, it will be months of paperwork to try to change it. If there's a spelling error in my daughter's name, and it's one of those things where, like, I'm not supposed to be looking at her screen, but like the first time she's, sitting there like an airhead and chattering away and smiling, and it's like you reach over and look at the screen like, no, that's not my daughter's name. You got it wrong. Like, we're standing here. My wife speaks French completely fluently. I speak enough to get by. The name is written on paper. It's in front of her. She's got the keyboard. How is it possible for someone where that's their only job, that's their only responsibility, to be so terrifyingly incompetent? I'm mentioning that memory first because our whole experience with pregnancy and childbirth, likewise at every stage, included encounters both in Canada and in France with terrifyingly incompetent medical professionals, bureaucrats, etc. And it would be a bit melodramatic to say my life is in their hands or my daughter's life is in their hands. But sometimes it feels that way. Back when we were in Canada, I remember there was one woman, and she simply operated the ultrasound equipment. And she was so uncomfortable. You know what? 2 women. This happened twice. It was different. Their only job is to ultrasound pregnant women. Like, it's a specialized office. She doesn't do broken legs or anything else. And she's totally uncomfortable with the female body and pregnancy and this stuff. It's like, this is not the job for you. How did you end up in this job? Did you show up at the wrong auditions, for this part? It's bizarre. And, how much am I supposed to reassure this woman like she could be reassuring us? And I remember at one point, one of the 2 women who liked this was just incredibly uncomfortable. You can see with the body language and everything else, just with dealing with pregnant woman baby. She just said, I don't do this procedure if the husband is in the room. So if you want to watch or you want to be here to hold your wife's hand, you have to leave. That's not allowed. And I said to her, wasn't aggressive, wasn't hostile. I said, okay, I understand. Give me the name and phone number of another office where we can do this instead. Like, we're not going to do this here. I'm not going to leave the room while my wife goes through this. And, possibly my wife is going to get bad news. if you hear your baby has a health problem or something wrong, you want to be there. But I just said, okay, fine. Where do you let's reschedule? And I said, either we'll reschedule with another technician. She's not a doctor. She's a not her title. We'll reschedule with another medical professional, either at this office or fine, no problem. And she caved. And she caved in the most pathetic way, like you'd think it was her first day on the job. You think this was a totally new concept or not something she does multiple times per day, 7 days a week. She looked down at the ground and she slumped her shoulders and she just walked in the office. She was like, okay then, and let me come in. Even though it's a subtle moment in dealing with medical professionals, you have to ask yourself, so on the one hand, how many men have had to sit in the hallway while their wife got tragic bad news about a pregnancy or something else upsetting happens during the ultrasound? And on the other hand, how many men have just stood up as much as I did and said, no, that's unacceptable, we'll reschedule? How many times has this script played out with the two and only two possibilities? And would it be too much to expect someone who does this for a living, someone who's a specialized professional, the same way like, okay, your only job is typing out a newborn baby's name. Your only job is basically being unobtrusive and inoffensive while you operate this machine, ultrasound on a pregnant woman. Couldn't we replace those people with someone who is good at the job or someone who likes the job or someone who is at least not this miserable and self-pitying and sulking and inept? Like, wow. So look, I'm not going to, believe me, the whole video could just be a catalog of terrible experiences with medical professionals. I am vegan. My ex-wife is vegan. The baby, as far as I know, is vegan. Obviously, at some point, she gets to make up her own mind about that. But in the first 10 months, she's not making the rules. It is true that a big part of the drama and the struggle after my daughter was born was just getting vegan food for my wife in the hospital. And she was there for several days. Wasn't just a quick in and out. And I did make the trip from the hospital to the downtown core of the city we were in and back again. The hospital was way out in the outskirts. Look, disclaimer. I'm about 6'3" when I wake up in the morning. I'm about 6'2" when I go to bed at night. I normally say I'm 6'2.5" if someone wants an accurate size, but I do very. I'm not that big a guy. In Europe, here in China even, I'm not that big a guy. I remember I was with my girlfriend at the airport after midnight when they had the tough security staff on. The midnight crew at the airport. And I just pointed out to her, I said, look, pay attention. Because this is like the only time in China you're going to see a bunch of guys standing around who are about the same size I am. They had all guys who were over 6 foot tall on security as we were exiting the airport at about midnight. That is rare here in China. I do stand out as a big, but I'm not that big a guy. But I remember whenever I would go from the hospital downtown to buy hummus and rice and vegetables, prepared food. We couldn't cook in the hospital, but I would buy a whole mishmash, a lot of it being, Mediterranean and, Middle Eastern food and what have you. Buy this stuff and take it back to the hospital. Because I've been dealing with so much aggression, so many insults, so many denigrating statements from the doctors and nurses when I was at the hospital. It was so much sorrow and misery and negativity. When I was walking down the streets just to buy that food, I was radiating, the very sincere feeling. And there were, some of those streets, there were pimps, there were pushers, there were drug dealers, there were some prostitutes in the streets, there were some, there were also just some homeless people. But identifiably, there were some criminals in those largely cobblestone streets, actually. And I was just radiating. I wish you would. And again, I'm not that big a guy. And I was really thinking, if one of these people tries to mug me or tries to start something, might be a nice break from the hospital to spend the night in the police station or something. And, all those people, they got out of my way. People actually slunk back from me in fear when I was walking down the road. I was carrying like a plastic bag with some falafels in it or whatever. Whatever the vegan options were I put together that night. But look, already, I mean, I'm laughing about it now. I'm smiling about it now. 4 years later, happy birthday, Zan. It should have been the happiest time of my life. And entirely because of the conduct of medical professionals, it was the most miserable, the saddest, I mean, really tragically awful day of my life, or several days of my life. It was just terrible. And, oh man, I've mentioned this to friends of mine who are black or who are non-white in different contexts. I'm sorry, not like I have a ton of black friends here. I come from Canada. In some parts of Canada, like you're in Victoria, you see maybe one black person a month. Like there are just not that many black people in other parts of Canada. When I was growing up in Toronto, I had one black friend. I mean, I don't have that many. But still today, with friends and people I know on the internet who are black, I mentioned them. During that time living in the south of France is the only time in my life when people perceived me as and treated me as non-white. They didn't know what I was. I think they put me in the category of miscellaneous North African. And there are some North Africans who are very fair-skinned. I met them when I was there in France. The Berbers and so on, most famously. But there are a lot of ways people can be North African and not look too far off my appearance. But in the conversations with the doctors, many of whom were themselves non-white, the main doctor we dealt with was of Arab ancestry. I never asked where she was from, but many of the medical staff, the doctors and nurses, were themselves non-white and nevertheless racist. And racist against me and my wife as non-white people. I wish I was making this up, but we were absolutely categorized as being poverty-stricken, miscellaneous North Africans, or possibly Middle Eastern. Maybe some of them thought we were from the Middle East or something. But I think they all assumed we were from North Africa. And they would say things. Now, again, some of this is unspoken communication, but a lot of it was explicitly articulated. These are conversations you have with the doctors and nurses. And you just get stuff like, you ask a totally respectable question. Like, okay, yeah, so what is your procedure with the umbilical cord? Like, do you let the umbilical cord exhaust itself, dry up, and then cut it, or do you cut immediately? You're asking procedural questions that actually everyone should ask. And your doctor turning to you with sneering contempt and saying, well, how do they do it in your country then? If you think Medicare is so good in your country, why don't you do it like that there? And I reply straight up, I'm from Canada. I was born in Ontario, Canada. Like, what direction do you want to take this conversation in? And, once they similarly insulted my wife this way and saying like, yes, well, then the doctor speaking, well, I have a degree in medicine. What kind of education do you have from your country then? And my wife had to answer, I have a PhD from Cambridge. They were really, like, I'm laughing about it now, 4 years later to the day. But let me tell you, it was no laughing matter of time. Even though, after the doctors left, she and I did joke about it a bit, me and my ex-wife. But wow, the level of hostility, and again, fundamentally, the level of incompetence. Because, like, this is your one job. All these doctors and nurses were specialized. We were in a specialized wing of the hospital that is just for new births. And even then, I have to add, we were in a specialized wing that is for normal births, for babies with no health problems, right? And this was just misery, unbelievable misery. I know I've mentioned somewhere in a YouTube video before, at one point, I actually did have to prevent a nurse from punching my wife. She got so out of control emotionally. I had to physically, I didn't touch her, but I had to move her out the door. I had to put my body in between the two of them and just close the door against her. She was still screaming. And and she banged the door and this kind of stuff. It was a solid metal door, fireproof door, I guess. The door made a big bang when she punched it or kicked it, whatever she did. It was that raw. It was that intense. And very fundamentally, apart from immaturity, apart from all the other things you complain about, this is a form of incompetence. You have to understand that. Because if this is your only job, is to cope with newborn babies and the questions from parents at this time, some of them simple, straightforward questions. Like at one point they had to withdraw blood, and like the form just said like 5. Now I later figured out why this was. It was printed out from a computer. I said, look, what is the unit? Like 5 milliliters of blood? Like how much blood are you taking? And that was actually the time when the nurse got so angry I had to physically prevent her from punching my wife. And my wife is bedridden, by the way. My wife is not standing up. She's she's laid out. She's talking about punching a woman in a stretcher in a hospital bed. That time the question was actually said, look, before I can consent, because they want me to sign this, there's no unit. How much blood are you taking? And you know what? I'm certain it is now. I'm certain it's because it was printed out from a computer, and the computer couldn't make the Greek symbol. It must have been microliters. It was supposed to have a special symbol after the 5, but sometimes when a computer can't do something like that, it just leaves it blank. And none of them could answer the question. We had a fucking team of nurses in the room, and none of them knew what unit is this. How much blood are you? It's not 5 liters, people. Like how much blood you drop the baby? They couldn't, and they couldn't answer the question. And again, they couldn't even keep calm. They couldn't even, in a reasonable, and helpful way, deal with and respond to a question like that from a parent who's concerned. So that, I'm going to say, the whole situation from day one should have been the happiest day of my life, and instead it was the most harrowing and the most miserable, not due to any health problem my daughter had. My daughter was 110% healthy, the pregnancy and the birth. They were better than 100% perfect. I'll come back to that. It was just the attitudes of the medical professionals involved, including their attitudes in their hatred for us as vegans. And we did get, again, this is not just interpreting body language or the look in somebody's eye. They spelled it out for us, and they asked us crazy questions about veganism. They showed just how much contempt they had for us because we were vegan, and that they assumed we would be anti-vaccine. They assumed we were members of a cult. They asked us directly about that, if we were a cult member because we were vegan. It was really, really awful. So purely for that reason, not due to any conduct on my daughter's part, not due to any conduct on my ex-wife's part. They were both impeccable, not due to any conduct on my part. Purely due to the attitudes of the medical professionals. It was a harrowing and traumatizing experience, and it needn't have been, it shouldn't have been. But keeping it all the way real, I just mentioned we were in a special wing. It was just healthy babies. It was just new births. And I was always going out to buy food and come back. One time, I went and got food. I came back, and I just took a different staircase to get up to the room. I thought, I bet it's a shorter trip if I come up this way. And I went through the special wing that is for babies born with a heart deformation, a heart malformity. Wow. Just walking down that hallway, just seeing the parents, leaning against the wall, standing in the hallway, standing outside the doors. I wasn't going to anyone's room. I was just walking down the hallway. The sense of ambient tragedy hanging in the air was on another level. And, I said to my wife when I got in, look, if you're ever feeling that we have it hard here in this wing of the hospital, if you're ever feeling sorry for yourself, because we do, it was a horrible, hard experience. Don't get me wrong. You can go through 2 pairs of double doors that way and go into that wing. And those are the babies that were not born healthy. And you can take a look at the expressions on the faces of the parents in there. And you can see what it's like for the people in this hospital who really have it hard. But, again, keeping it all the way real, as I'm wont to do, look, guys, this is also why I think we had doctors and nurses who were so incompetent. I think the doctors and nurses who were really talented and really reliable were all being assigned to more high-pressure wings of the hospital, even if it was within the maternity ward. I don't know what to say. So probably the best nurses and the best doctors were dealing with the babies who have health problems or in those other departments, or they're dealing with heart surgery or cancer surgery or you name it. But there was so much specialization. It was a big, famous hospital that I think we were getting the worst of the worst. We were getting the least competent even within, the doctors and nurses dealing with maternity babies. It was shocking. It's unbelievable. But that I just mentioned, that also happens a lot in the military. Even friends of mine, but also just family members who have experience with working in the military, they've often said to me, you get the situation where, the really sharp people are reassigned to crucial departments. And then when you're in a department where there's some more slack in the rope, so to speak, where things are not so urgent, where things are not life-threatening, then you just seem to be shocked all the time. You seem to be amazed at the levels of incompetence that you're dealing with. So I think some of that was going on in that hospital. Now, in terms of my own experience, we did go through parent education in Canada. We went to, what would be the word? I don't know, orientation meetings or special education meetings where medical professional talks you through what's going to happen with the birth and what can go wrong and how to prepare yourself. And they show you video of birth itself and of newborn babies and of what to expect. And they explain to you how the hospitals are organized. So in Canada, before we went to France for the birth, I did actually have that background, that education. So, as in most movies and TV shows, I was expecting newborn baby to be this kind of screaming, ugly, covered with mucus, covered with blood, spectacle that you've seen in movies, and that indeed that's what I saw even in these educational documentaries that I saw with an educator breaking all these things down. And when they actually handed my daughter to me, on the contrary, there was no blood on her, there was no mucus on her, she wasn't screaming, she was completely peacefully sleeping. She looked beautiful. She didn't look like a newborn baby. She looked like a 1-month-old baby. Everything was completely fully formed and developed. Every eyelash was perfect. The eyebrows were perfect. She wasn't upset. She didn't seem to be surprised to be born. And she did look beautiful. She looked different just a couple days later into into her life. But I do remember what she looked like. And they handed me this baby, and time thought, this looks like a fake baby. If I take a photograph of myself holding this baby, people will think it's at least a week old. This does not look like the baby one moment after it was born. Now, there are reasons for that, including the fact that a lot of what you see, the images of babies, are born earlier in their term. And my daughter went all the way through. She had a full 100% development of the womb. So she is, in effect, a little bit older than what a lot of other new babies look like. And some of those things you see in a newborn baby, the mucus and so on, depending on how late into the final trimester you give birth, I'm told that those things vary. So again, I did get some education in this. But still, it was striking and bizarre. And the denouement of this, so again, I'm handed this baby. And this should be a moment of joy or happiness, or I should at least have my wife there next to me, what have you. But for purely bureaucratic reasons, they put me in like a closet with this newborn baby. It was this tiny windowless room with the door. They put me there with the baby, and then they separately relocated my wife to a room where she would wait. That would be the room she slept in and what have you too, to her main room. And I had to wait in this closet with this newborn baby. Now, I think any time this baby is going to wake up and want to breastfeed or what have you, this is a stressful situation. And hours are going by. And finally, so there are two nurses working this special ward, this special area. There's nobody else. There's no other patient. There are no other men. There's nobody else. It's me with a baby in this closet, and I'm waiting there for no legitimate reason, right? Like if they want to put me there for 5 minutes, I don't know why. And then my wife goes to the other room. I have no idea why. I'm guessing it's because legally there's a question of who actually has custody of the baby during those few minutes or something. I have no idea why. And ultimately, after a couple of hours had gone by like this, with me being in the, low-key, terrifying situation, also, I don't speak French that well, of being assigned to this bizarre room in this ward and not knowing why I'm not in the same room with my wife, now my ex-wife. Finally, I just have to come out. I'm holding the baby. I have to come out and I have to stand in the hall in front of the office where these two nurses are. And they just keep saying, no, just wait in the room, just wait in the room. And they say to me, legally, you can't stand there. You have to go into the cubicle with the baby. Like, it's a crime for you to stand in the hallway. And I said to them in French, call the police. I said, I understand your situation. I can't wait in this room with my baby any longer, and with nothing else, by the way. Like, you're just in a fucking concrete cell with the baby. It's not like I have a milk bottle or anything else either. I said, if you have to call the police, good. Call the police, because I can't wait here anymore. And then obviously one nurse was more senior than the other. And the more senior nurse said, this was all in French, of course, she said dismissively and contemptuously, she said, you just have to wait in that room until, your wife has been moved into her room, has been relocated into her room. And the more junior nurse said, that happened hours ago. And you have that moment where there are people in authority, there are people wearing uniforms, and they were just threatening to call the cops on me and put me in jail. Really, seriously, they were. That was what they were saying. And they suddenly have a moment of recognition that they're in the wrong and that I've done nothing wrong. And are they going to admit that? Or are they going to apologize to me or what? And this is France. Nobody in authority admits that they're wrong. Nobody. It's a terrifying thing, actually, about dealing with French government and French bureaucracy. Then there was a final stage where they wanted me to go out into a main hallway, down another hallway, turn left, and go through an unmarked door. There was a door with no sign and no doorknob. There was a completely unmarked door in a hallway full of confusing doors. Because that was their protocol to prevent people from stealing the baby. And they said, okay, so you leave the baby here, and then you follow these complex instructions, you go through the door. And if you ask which door, they say there's no sign, there's no number, it's just one of the doors. You'll figure it out. And again, I haven't slept in 48 hours or something. It's normal when you have a newborn baby. You go for a long period of time. Sorry, as the man, unless you're sleeping while your wife's awake. But I was awake the whole time. Went through the whole process with my ex-wife. And, so I haven't slept in a very long time. And I just said to them, no, I'm not going to figure it out. I said, look, I can go through another door. Like, I'm not going to do this. Which was completely honest and completely true. And again, my ability to speak French is what it is. And again, so the senior nurse starts threatening to call the cops or something, but I'm just admitting to you, you guys have a complex system where for some reason you want me to be separated from my baby and then go through this other door. And that's not going to work right now, And finally, the junior nurse, who was obviously the smarter of the two, she just admitted that it's a problem. A lot of parents get lost looking for that door. It actually is a problem. It's a hidden door. It's intentionally hard to find. That's why they call it hidden. And so the younger nurse just silently, she walked out the door. She said, follow me. She walked down the hallway. And then she opened the secret door for me. She pointed to the correct door. So I got my daughter. And I was glad. I was completely right. It would have been a disaster otherwise. So then I went through that door. And then the same nurse walked down and got my baby and brought it to me at the secret door. Ooh. So, just now, recently, I've had a death in the family. My father is now deceased. And I was talking to my mom a little bit and, philosophizing a bit with her, using my robust background in Buddhist philosophy and European philosophy to say something profound and meaningful in the situation, which I'm pretty good at. I could improvise philosophy lessons without too much trouble. And, one of the things I said to my mom was, look, you're going through this situation where the absurdity you have to deal with every day is the contrast between the profound and personal nature of why you were at the hospital and the antiseptic, authoritarian, bureaucratic, dehumanizing nature of what the hospital is itself. A lot of people, if they had to choose between dying on a battlefield and dying in a hospital, would rather die in a battlefield. Would rather die in any situation more meaningful or more poetic than being in a hospital. It's just one is just not very well suited to the other. Hospital's not a good place to be born. It's not a good place to die. It's lacking. It's lacking the very soul that such a place ought to be the place where you first meet your own son, or you first meet your own daughter, you first hold a baby in your arms, or where you say goodbye to your father or your grandfather as they're going through their last minutes. But no, I mean, for better and for worse, that is the format. That is the institution that our culture has created, where people deal with all of these, terrible and terrifying transitions of the beginning and ending of life. And that, in short, is my story of how my daughter was born.